I'm Elle, and I write The Elysian, which is I'm thinking through the future of nation states and companies and humanity, and trying to figure out the things that will create a better future for all of us. And a lot of the work that I do, I would consider solutions-oriented journalism or even speculative journalism. What could the world look like 50 years, but also 1,000 years, and even 10,000 years from now, and kind of how can we engineer that to be for the good? So this topic is very, very top of mind today. Like, how can we create these online city-states that are much better for us than the old ones?
It sounds like sort of the intersection between journalism and science fiction when you put it that way.
That should be my tagline. Journalism meets science fiction.
What does the name The Elysian mean?
It's based off of the Greek, the Elysian fields. It's the mythological, kind of paradise, which forms good symbolism for my work.
Very cool. Well, I thought we might start by talking about the video that Mark Zuckerberg put out yesterday, which was, for those who missed it, he put out sort of a statement announcing a pretty wild departure from past Meta policy, and in my view, in favor of more latitude for freedom of the press on Meta properties, a repeal of the prohibition on talking about political content, which has now been rebranded civic content now that it's back, and just kind of general, it seems to me like in general, an acknowledgement of the vibe shift and a commitment to follow the new vibe. But what did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think when social media kind of first started emerging, we were just like, we can do anything on these platforms. And then when everybody was doing bad things on those platforms, I think the initial knee-jerk reaction was, oh no, we need to censor the bad stuff out, or we just need to make sure that that's not bubbling up to everyone. And the kind of decision there was to have the company, the platform, censor it. So Facebook or whatever, Twitter. But if you think about that in terms of a city-state, that's kind of like an early city-state being like, oh no, everybody in the streets is saying bad things about the king. Let's squash them and make sure they can't say bad things about the king. So like you get why you have to do that and why that's the knee-jerk reaction. But then years down the line, we're like, well, this is not working. Nobody can say anything. We're relying on the media systems to say the right thing, and we don't know if they're saying the right thing. And so I think, well, I'm curious if you think Substack was one of the first to kind of do something different here, because you guys were very much like, we're not gonna moderate from the platform down at the beginning, but at the same time, there's like a little bit later, then Twitter was like, we're gonna do community notes, and like Nextdoor had something similar, and there kind of started to emerge this idea that like, okay, maybe the government or like the platform shouldn't moderate us, but maybe we should, the jury model. Do you think that was like kind of Substack was the early reaction to that, or how did that evolve alongside the other ones?
Yeah, I think we were relatively early in that view. Ever since sort of the start of Substack in 2017, I've felt pretty strongly that freedom of the press is essential on online platforms. I don't buy the argument that anything that's not literally done by the federal government is not an abridgment of your right to free expression.
Right.
And I think, to the point of what we're talking about today, I do think that there's funny ways in which the spaces we live online kind of are quasi-states or they're at least like rule makers that are like setting the rules in a space that we spend time in and invest in and care about. And my view from the start was always, there has to be a way to promote a free press that does not devolve into kind of lowest common denominator shouting. Because there's a fairly well-known sort of failure mode to this, where you say, if you come out and you say, we are the free speech platform, that's our whole deal, you have a problem where you get, the people who that's most selectively appealing to are the people that are getting kicked out everywhere else. You can have kind of like a giant, if you have sort of like mere anarchy unleashed, yeah, you might have freedom from top-down censorship, but you're not actually making us space that people want to spend time in. The enemy is not having some rules or some order or some norms. the enemy is that being sort of passed down from on high from an unaccountable and uncaring body that doesn't have your interest at heart. And so we've always set out from the start to sort of like have Substack be an answer to that question insofar as we could, devolve power to the writers, the creators, the communities themselves. And I do think we were like, at least it felt pretty lonely in 2017, 2018, taking that stance. And I'm very happy that many others in the world have caught up to it now.
Yeah. And now that's a big shift with Facebook being like, okay, we're going to do the same thing on Facebook and Instagram. And I think I'm a big fan of New Public's work, and they absolutely look at digital spaces kind of like city states. They actually think of them like public parks. And it's like there's some public parks that through design and otherwise become antisocial spaces. And there are some public parks that through design and other things become these like beautiful gardens where everybody else is hanging out. So you're right. There is, to make a park like the flourishing public park where people are gathering and kids are playing in the playground and you're sitting and having a cup of coffee, or you feel like you can have a picnic. There is some level of like policing that you might have to keep that nice, but there's also a lot you can do with just design and making sure there's park benches and trash cans or like gates around the park, and like making sure the playground equipment is nice and that you have a landscaper. Like, and I think that's kind of the age that we're seeing now, and kind of Substack was an early model of that, and still is one of New Public's, one of the ones the case studies they study as like a positive public park space. So I really like that.
Very cool. Yeah, well, I'm happy, I do feel like there's been sort of like a vibe shift kind of since the election in the past little bit. I do give a lot of credit to Elon Musk, despite the differences that we've had with him over time. Like I do think he and X were kind of like early on making some changes that have large positive aspects to them, even if imperfect. And I do think it's sort of like, the other thing that sort of struck me about Zuck's statement was the reasons he gave were kind of like, well, it seems like this is what people want now, and it seems like this is what the new administration will support. And on the one hand, that those changes are very welcome, and I applaud them, and it's good. And on the other hand, it does sort of leave open the question of, what happens when it goes the other way.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think there's also the fact that Facebook and Instagram are so incredibly large, and the way that you read on both platforms is still like very jumbled up with I think a good example is Jamila Jamal, who now has a Substack, which I follow, but she was her primary social media forever was Instagram. And when she decided to move to Substack, so she could meet people directly, she would go on Instagram and like flash her like bra or her swimsuit and like in a picture and be like, new Substack post. And then like instantly all of her followers would see that post on Instagram. And they're like, you can just see in the comments, everyone being like, I've followed you for a year, or I've followed you on Instagram for years. This is the first time your picture has shown up in my feed. And she like does that as this like kind of thirst trap to get the algorithm to like notice her post so that her people who are following her can see her. So then it's like, sure, you can get rid of moderation all you want, but if you don't change the underlying park city state that you've created here, is that the city state everybody wants to hang out in? Because they're just like, well, great, I'm just seeing thirst traps all day.
Well, and the incentive structure you create matters a lot, right? That like setting rules of the platform is not the only thing that influences behavior. People notice what works and notice what wins. And if the way that you win, the way that you get your post seen is by flashing the camera, you'll get more of that than you otherwise would.
Right.
And that's another thing that we try to think hard about at Substack is kind of like, how can we devise a system where the way that you win is doing the work you believe in a way that people value, and kind of like as much as possible, every system of this is going to be imperfect and have flaws and downsides, but as much as possible, kind of set up the score of the game to reflect the thing that's in the interest of the people participating. Like you want, as a writer, you want to make something valuable for an audience. You want to do something independent that you believe in. And as, a subscriber, you want the stuff you actually value rather than just like the thing that maybe you click on despite your better judgment.
Yeah. And I think about that a lot in terms of, I mean, if in an ideal city-state structure where you've got multiple city-states that you can choose from to choose which one you want to live in, which one you want to visit or whatever, it's somewhat, it's dependent on the city-state itself to make that place a good place to live, a good place to do business. It's a place you want to spend your time, raise your kids. Like you would ideally want to attract citizens to it. You don't want them all to leave for another one. And I think that until recently, a lot of the social media platforms have been places that you don't want to spend time on, but there weren't necessarily like better ones to go to. And I actually thought it was really interesting when you hosted a recent Substack live with Girage, and he said that he like loves YouTube, but he hated how getting on YouTube because he wouldn't see the videos that he like the accounts that he subscribed to. He only saw like what the algorithm whatever videos came up, and so he actually like designed his own script that would let him only see the YouTube videos by the accounts he subscribed to. And I was just like, well, what is that saying about our platforms if they're not designed for the way that we want to read them? They're literally just designed to get you to like to read and watch the things you don't want to read and watch just because they're addicting. Like we're creating antisocial behavior instead of social behavior.
It actually gets to kind of a deep philosophical question, which is like, when you say you want something, like, what are we talking about here? Because there's different versions of yourself. There's sort of like the lizard brain scrolling, like, oh, look, somebody flashing the camera. Like, there's sort of like, there's some, it's easy to build an algorithm that picks up on kind of like that, what the basest version of yourself reacts to.
Right.
And that is something, and this is like a defense that you could make. You can say, hey, people are just choosing this stuff, right? It's popular because this is what people want. And it's true in some sense. But there's also like, there's the version of you that wants it as like the way you want to eat a bunch of cotton candy. And then there's a version of you that when you sit back and think, in my week, in my life, where do I want to live? How do I want to spend my time? And I think that choice architecture matters. Like the difference between choosing what to spend my time on by like scrolling a very addictive feed and then either continuing or not versus like choosing to like, leave a city state in this analogy, maybe like stop using one app and pick up a different app.
Yeah.
I think Substack is a little like this, where like when I go to choose to do a paid subscription to something, that's going to be a more conscious choice. It's appealing to like a better and more considered part of myself than the choice of like, do I keep watching this video? And part of what a platform could do, if it set its mind to it, is like try to ally with that better version of yourself. And like,
right,
it's never going to be complete. Like you never want to make something that's just like boring and bland and never has anything interesting. But you kind of want to like have a mix where if you want to make conscious choices about what to want and how to spend your life and who to become, you don't have to be like a monk to do that.
Right.
Like, it puts it within reach of human willpower.
Right. You could like, I can be like, what I really want is to eat healthy. But if the only food court options are junk, then I'll be like, well, I really want that burger. So like, if there's a healthy option, then maybe I'll take it. Or if I can go to Whole Foods or like something where I know that everything I'm going to get is healthy, then I would love that. And it doesn't mean it has to be not exciting, but those options have to be available. And
yeah, but it's probably easier to choose to shop at Whole Foods and then not have a ton of junk food than to like be in your house and see the stacks of chips and just like walk by them 100 times a day. No, I won't scroll on that thing.
And if building Substack or if building platforms means that we're building a city state, how do we want our citizens to behave? Do we want to support their baser selves or the selves that they want to be? Which would we rather cater to? Which do we want to nurture in our society? Because I do think that our platforms are really affecting what our society looks like quite a bit. So I think that's in our platform's ability to shape the public discourse in a positive way versus a negative way. No pressure.
And something I think a lot of people start to realize is also our desires are not fixed. It's not that there's like one set of things, one set of tastes you have, or one set of reactions that you have. There's a little bit of a like, if you start to eat a lot of junk food, you start to crave the junk food. There's kind of like, you can get into you can get into a whole rhythm with the thing. I don't think I don't want to be a sort of too much of a moralist or a purist about this. I'm not against fun content or junk food or, like, yeah, sometimes there's a funny meme and I like that. And like, that's okay. But I think that there should be a balance. Yeah. I think the thing that really goes wrong is when you have some objective function, which is nerd speak for like a numeric goal that you're optimizing towards with your algorithm or whatever. If you get too good at optimizing along one really narrow dimension, you can just get all kinds of, crazy side effects that are not really what anybody would have wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Girage script is telling, right? Because if you're like, what I want to do is watch these accounts, and I do this on Substack as well, right? I definitely subscribe to some Substacks that are just like fun and lighthearted, like goofy things that I would just think are fun and want to subscribe to. But like, I chose that. It's not like just popping up for me out of nowhere and like reinforcing me to spin on something stupid, then there's the next thing.
So where do you get the city-state metaphor from? That's really interesting. What makes you feel like there's these places or city-states online? Walk me through the analogy.
If you think about like the original, Plato's The Republic, where it's a bunch of guys sitting around discussing what the ideal city-state could look like, I think we still use that model today for literally anything we want to build. If we want to build a business, if we want to do city planning, we're constantly thinking of the same thing, like what will be for the best good of people, what's the best way to plan or organize or architect something, so that it has the best benefit of whoever is participating. And I think that there's even literal examples of this now with a bunch of rich guys being like, I'm going to build a city in wherever. And, we have examples like Dubai, and we kind of have these, we can curate or architect this idea of like, this would be the ideal society. And even in Plato's Republic, there was a lot of discussion about what the press should look like how should people get information? And those philosophers at that time were very much pro, like we should knock down the people that get on the town square and say bad things or incorrect things, or even quote the wrong philosophers. We've obviously evolved that take, but I think there's still this concept of that the online platforms shape the discussion. And we can see that every online platform shapes the discussion in a different way. I do not have X because I do not value the discussion that happens there. Every time I've ever gone, I don't like what I see there, and I just don't want to I don't like value like the short form even thing. So I wanted to be where I could read long form and get in-depth understanding of something. And so that's why I chose Substack as my city state. But there are other city states, and some of them suck and promote antisocial behavior, and some of them are positive and promote pro-social behavior. And so that's what I'm really into, is like, how can we architect the one and not the other?
Very cool.
Sounds like Mills is in the comments talking about lizard people. So we're in the right place.
This is a great city state. We've done all of them.
How are you thinking about this as you build?
Honestly, in a lot of the same way. Like, I kind of think of Substack as like creating this like alternative space. I sometimes call it like a different universe with different laws of physics, or it's, call it a different city state with different laws, but sort of be like, I think there's a set of rules and norms and like a way to build the thing that can unlock something really valuable for people and help people create a lot of great culture, a lot of great art, do a lot of great journalism, this kind of thing that otherwise wouldn't have come to exist. And that stuff is valuable and is like worth rewarding. And so we do spend a fair amount of time kind of like trying to think about the right way to set this up so that and part of that's like philosophically, that's what we want to do. But part of that is just like in practical terms, if we make something that's just the same as everything else, nobody's going to want it, right? We're not going to out TikTok. We're not going to out XX. And so if we want to make something that's successful, we do have to, it's not enough to just sort of like sit around and philosophize. We have to make sure that that philosophizing is turning into something that is actually differentiated and valuable, and that we can tell people that story in a way that's compelling to them. And then there's just a million things of like, whatever your philosophy is, like the roads need to work and traffic lights have to be on and the garbage needs to go out and whatever the analogies are. There's a lot that goes into kind of like building a platform like this where it just has to work and be good. And you don't get to skip any of that stuff just because you think you have a cooler philosophy.
Very true. You're doing a good job on infrastructure.
Oh, it's 0% me. You'd thank Jenny and a lot of the people on the team for that. I'd love to hear. Tell me about this. Is it a cooperative? What's this initiative that you're cooking?
Oh, I had this idea. I mean, I think I'm similarly aligned with you in that I want to see a better media ecosystem, and I think Substack is a really, really good model of a better media ecosystem. But I wanted to also, as an independent writer, collaborate with other writers on specific projects. And so I decided I'm trying to build a cooperative media ecosystem in which I collaborate with these other writers. For example, upcoming topics we're talking about, one is called City State. And we're putting together a print magazine and, digital, the issues will be on Substack as well, about how we could create kind of an ideal future in terms of governance and design. The next one is about terraforming and how we could terraform our environment to the best benefit of humanity. And so we're kind of creating these like bookmarked issues, and then we will post them on Substack, sell each magazine or issue, and then distribute the profits evenly among contributors, so that we kind of have a bunch of writers and thinkers thinking about how we can create a better future, but also designing a better media ecosystem in the process that benefits writers and collaboratives and creators, rather than just these kind of top-down media structures that hire people to write an article based on their agenda.
That's very cool. You point out something where a lot of people who have a similar idea, their instinct is like, well, I should form a media company, I should hire people, I should commission stuff. But you're taking kind of a different tack. Why? What's different and why?
Well, I think if I've thought about this before, like if I decided to just turn the Elysian into a magazine with a bunch of different writers, but then I paid every writer, here's $500, here's $1,000, write this piece I'm interested in, then I'm just recreating traditional media. And traditional media, the problem with it is you're just hiring somebody on assignment. So you're like, I have this agenda, I have this thing you want to write, I'm paying you to write it, it should turn out like that. And then here's my media empire that represents the interests of me and how I make money. And so I just didn't want to recreate that. I think it's really valuable that writers are independent now on Substack, and they should remain independent, building their own followings and making their own money. But why not collaborate together on certain projects and issues and try to brainstorm the same topics together, and we can still all share those ideas individually, even as we collaborate on them, share the revenue, and create a media ecosystem that's more based on what we think a better media system would look like. So that's the thinking anyway. Our first project's coming out in a couple months.
Very cool. Yeah, I love that. I love that philosophy. And it, as you might guess, it sort of really matches how I think about this. So with something we've said in the past is going independent shouldn't have to mean going it alone.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I think about was building Substack. You'll notice that we have this live feature that we're using right now. And one of the interesting things about it is it gives us a way where we can collaborate, we can have a conversation, we can make something together that reaches both of our audiences. If you're sitting there and you hit the subscribe button, you should subscribe to whichever of us you're not already subscribed to, which I recommend you do. And I love this area of exploration, of asking, is there a world where you can kind of have your own space, have your independence, and then get the benefits of collaboration, both sort of just the sort of like the cross promotional growth benefits of being exposed to each other's audiences, but also the creative benefits, right? The idea of like having an interesting conversation or having ideas come into contact with one another or having an interesting mix of things that wouldn't happen anywhere else because you have, these things coming into contact. I think is really exciting. Just like I love this.
And I've been writing on Substack full time for the last year, and it's lonely. And I'm just by myself coming up with ideas. And I was like, you know what? I want to create something that's not lonely. And I still want to be an independent writer, but I want to do it alongside other people and brainstorm with people, come up with ideas. And exactly, this is a great example. Like, look at us talking about these things, and we both have our own Substacks with our own thing. That's so cool. Like that should be facilitated. I love it.
Somebody in the comments was talking about human nature and the idea that there is such a thing as human nature, and it doesn't really change that much. And so this is like I think a critique that gets made a lot and is a fair critique of certain strands of utopianism that says there's a way you can get too far over your skis and you can get into these ideas of an ideal world that disregard human nature and facts about how people actually are. I'm curious what you make of that critique. Like, does that dull your enthusiasm for some of these sci-fi projects you work on, or how do you think about that?
I mean, first of all, when I think of a utopian future, I don't think of one future that I've come up with that everybody should agree is ideal. I think of every single one of us has our own ideal of what that ideal future is and are empowered to create that in our own local communities or in our own local community online. You could say that every writer on Substack has their own ideal media company that's based exactly how they would want media to be, right? So that is utopian in the sense that those all exist alongside each other. As far as human nature is concerned, human nature is many, many, many things. And as we've kind of been talking about, you can cultivate the good in humanity and you can cultivate the bad in humanity. And that's kind of what I'm interested in. How are we going to cultivate the good? People won't always be good. I think I wrote an article called, the one article I wrote about human nature was called Humans Are Good, Except That One Guy. And the reason why I called it that is I kind of based it off of, there's like this theory called the 25 grizzly theory or whatever, is something is like, only one out of every 25 grizzly bears will attack a person, but it's like that one person that makes all people have to avoid all grizzlies. And I think the effect is similar in humans, where it's like most people are good, and most of the times we're good, but sometimes we suck, and sometimes sometimes whole people suck. And I think like a good kind of analogy for this effect is like Burning Man, which ultimately was originally tried to be like a anarchist utopia where it was like everyone can do anything, there's no rules, but then like people left their tent stakes in the ground when they left, and all these people had to come up afterwards and clean up after everyone, and people tipped over the porta potties because they were just in a mood, and then everyone had to clean up after them too. So it's like I think you like treat human nature like it's good, try to cultivate humans so that they can be their best. But also prepare in case sometimes we suck and sometimes we need to figure out what to do with those cases.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I sometimes, before Substack, I worked on a messaging app that at one point was used by like 40% of US teenagers, and you just get like, it's interesting to see what happens. And I kind of developed this like dual respect where it's like, on the one hand, human nature is real. There are things about people that you can't change and you shouldn't necessarily try to change. And if you blind yourself to that, you're going to go badly off the rails. And at the exact same time, that doesn't mean that like the rules of the space you live in don't matter. You can take the exact same flawed, sometimes good, sometimes bad, unbalanced, whatever people, and like make a heaven or a hell depending on, the society they live in, the rules, the games they play, the rules, the norms. And so the goal of, if you're trying to found a city-state analogy, the goal is like, make something that actually works for people as they are. And there's a very wide variation with the exact same people, you can make something really great or really terrible. I don't think the human nature, the fact that human nature exists relieves us of the responsibility to think about how do we take that crooked timber and like make something that people want and is good.
Yeah. And I empathize with the struggle all the media platforms have and all governments have right now with trying to, trying to nurture that good in society because, like in the US government, the FDA was established for a good reason because random dudes were poisoning people, like literally like selling poison and people were taking it as medicine and dying. So obviously you're like, okay, well, we got to create a rule for that. But then at what point do you create too many rules that then makes it hard to produce the good medicines, right? So, and it's the same thing on a social media platform. You're like, we want to encourage good discourse, we want to encourage good conversation, but like we also want to make sure that it doesn't become this horrible place to be. So what's the right balance?
And there's the same asymmetry in both cases where it's easy to point at the harms of something bad happened that I don't like, but it's really hard to point at the harms of something really incredible could have happened that we sort of strangled in the crib.
Yeah.
We had, too many rules about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I empathize with the struggle for sure. But you guys are doing a good job so far. I'm here on you for your city state.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. Well, let me ask you one more question before I let you go, which is, you've been using Live. How do you like it? Tell me about your experience. How should we make it better?
I like Live because of the collaborative aspect, it's interesting because before we had Live, I was just having private Zoom calls with people being like, tell me more, I want to learn from you. And then I would kind of write an article from our interview. And then with Substack Live, I was like, oh, I guess I could just have those meetings in public for everybody else to benefit from too. And then sometimes I don't even have to write an article about them because we just discuss it in person. So I think it's fun. I really like it. And I do think video has become such a predominant way of the way people consume information. So I appreciate having an easy way to do it.
Yeah, we sometimes say that videos become like the lingua franca of a lot of the social internet. And even if you're a writer, you want to be able to like make something that can live in the format.
But trying to make a YouTube video is totally beyond me. So I appreciate that I could just do this instead.
We're going to make the robots do that. You're going to be able to make a Substack Live and the robots are going to magically edit it and make it great and make it sound good and look good and make a beautiful YouTube video. We'll live in the future.
We're living in the future.
All right. Well, Elle, thank you very much for hanging out. This has been really fun. Anybody who does not yet subscribe to The Elysian should hit that button, I would say.
Thanks. Same for Chris's Substack. You could do so many great lives.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much.